Picture yourself at the edge of a vast stone staircase, descending deep into the earth, each step carved with intricate figures of gods and goddesses, leading down to a pool of shimmering water that seems to pulse with ancient energy. This is not some fantasy landscape. This is Chand Bayori in India, one of the world's most breathtaking stepwells, where architecture and devotion merge into a single, stunning reality. For thousands of years, civilizations across the globe didn't just use water, they worshipped it, designing magnificent structures that honored water not as a mere resource, but as a living, sacred force. These forgotten societies saw rivers, rain, and oceans as divine manifestations, and they built accordingly, creating what we now call sacred hydraulics, systems where engineering served spirituality and water flowed as both lifeblood and object of reverence. In this video, we're going to explore how ancient cultures from India to Rome, the Maya to Persia, transformed water into something far greater than a practical necessity. We'll uncover the hidden meanings behind these architectural marvels, the cosmic blueprints, the ritualistic designs, the urban layouts that revolved around water worship. You'll discover how stepwells doubled as subterranean temples, how aqueducts paid tribute to nymphs, and how natural sinkholes became portals to the underworld. But this isn't just a journey into the past. It's an invitation to rethink our modern relationship with water, to see it not as a commodity to be controlled, but as a cosmic force that has shaped human belief, creativity, and survival for millennia. By the time we're done, you'll understand why these ancient systems hold profound lessons for today's world, a world facing droughts, floods, and a growing disconnect from nature. You'll see how the sacred hydraulics of forgotten civilizations can inspire new approaches to sustainability, design, and even community. And perhaps most importantly, you'll come away with a renewed sense of awe for humanity's timeless dialogue with water, a dialogue that continues to echo in the architecture of the past and the innovations of the future. So join me as we step into the shadows of these ancient wonders, decode their secrets, and rediscover what it means to build in harmony with the elements we too often take for granted. To truly grasp the brilliance of these ancient water structures, we must first dive into the minds of the people who built them into a world where water was not just a physical substance, but the very essence of creation itself. For these forgotten civilizations, water was the primordial element from which all life emerged, a sacred force deeply woven into the fabric of their myths, their gods, and their understanding of the cosmos. This wasn't a minor belief, it was the foundational layer upon which entire societies were constructed. From the floodplains of Mesopotamia to the rainforests of Mesoamerica, water was seen as a divine manifestation, a living entity to be honored, appeased, and celebrated. Consider the Sumerians, one of humanity's earliest civilizations, thriving in the arid landscape between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. They didn't see these rivers as mere geographical features. They were the physical embodiment of the gods. The deity Enki was believed to rule over the Abzu, the vast subterranean ocean of fresh water that was the source of all life and wisdom. This profound spiritual concept directly inspired their architecture. The great ziggurats, those massive step temples that rose towards the heavens, were not just for celestial observation. They were symbolic mountains, carefully engineered structures that were believed to connect the world of humans with the watery abyss below and the realm of the gods above. Every brick, every level was a prayer in clay, mirroring a cosmic hierarchy where water was the ultimate source of power. This pattern repeats itself across the globe with astonishing consistency. In ancient Egypt, the annual flooding of the Nile was not a random weather event. It was the god happy bestowing his bounty upon the land, a direct divine intervention that dictated the rhythm of life, death, and rebirth. Their temples were meticulously aligned with the river, and intricate nilometers were built to measure the flood's height, not just for agricultural planning, but as a way to gauge the god's favor. Over in the Americas, the Maya revered Chok, the hook-nosed god of rain, whose anger was expressed through drought and whose benevolence brought life-giving storms. Their cities were built around natural cenotes, which were considered sacred portals to the underworld, precisely because they provided access to this divine liquid. This spiritual framework meant that every single water-related structure had a dual purpose. A canal was never just a canal for irrigation, it was a channel for divine energy. A reservoir was never just for storage, it was a sacred basin holding the essence of a god. A public fountain was never just for drinking, it was a shrine to a local nymph or spirit. Practicality and ceremony were inseparable. The design of these features was dictated by ritual needs, the direction of water flow, the materials used, the carvings adorning the walls, all served to honor water's sacred role. This stands in such stark contrast to our modern relationship with water, where it is often reduced to a commodified utility, hidden behind concrete walls and metal pipes, its spiritual dimension completely erased from our urban landscapes. That disconnect between seeing water as a divine gift versus a simple resource may hold the key to understanding many of the environmental challenges we face today. Now let's journey to the sun-scorched landscapes of northwestern India, where one of the most stunning expressions of this sacred relationship between humanity and water was carved directly into the earth itself. These are the stepwells, known as bayoris or vavs, and to stand before one is to witness architecture that doesn't just occupy space but seems to converse with the very elements. They are inverted temples, their grandeur not reaching for the sky but plunging deep into the ground, a breathtaking fusion of utility, community, and profound devotion. The most iconic among them, Chand Bayori in Rajasthan, is a masterpiece of geometric precision. Imagine a colossal inverted pyramid, a vast square crater with 13 stories of symmetrical staircases, 3,500 narrow steps in total, fanning out along the walls, descending over 100 feet into the cool, dark depths to meet a shimmering green pool of water. The visual effect is hypnotic, a mesmerizing pattern of light and shadow that feels both impossibly ancient and eternally powerful. But to label these structures merely as water storage systems is to miss their entire soul. They were, in every sense, subterranean cathedrals. As you would descend the steps, leaving the harsh heat of the day behind, you would pass into a world of intricate artistry and spiritual symbolism. The walls of stepwells like the magnificent Rani Kai Vav in Gujarat are not plain stone, they are vast canvases covered with hundreds of exquisite carvings. Here you find deities from the Hindu pantheon: Vishnu reclining on the cosmic serpent, Shiva in deep meditation, Lakshmi bestowing prosperity, along with a host of celestial nymphs, known as apsaras, and local goddesses who were guardians of water and fertility. This descent was a symbolic journey, a ritualistic passage into the womb of the earth, the source of all life and water. Each step downward was a move toward purification, both physical and spiritual, a leaving behind of the profane world for a sacred encounter. The very architecture was a calendar and a barometer of life itself. The design was brilliantly adaptive to the region's extreme climate, with its cyclical droughts and monsoons. The many levels of the steps corresponded directly to the fluctuating water table. During the scorching dry season, the community would have to descend further, the effort itself a form of devotion to access the precious resource. When the rains came, the lower steps would submerge, and the entire well would transform into a cool, cavernous reservoir. This wasn't just infrastructure, it was a living, breathing entity that dictated the rhythm of daily and seasonal life. These stepwells became vibrant social hubs, especially for women, who were traditionally the water gatherers. They were spaces for community gathering, for conversation, for children to play on the steps, and for travelers to find respite from the relentless sun. More than that, they were active sites of worship and meditation. Pavilions and carved niches built into the stepped sides provided shaded areas for priests to perform rituals and for individuals to sit in quiet contemplation, soothed by the acoustics of the space that amplified the gentle sounds of water and chant. Festivals were held here, with the steps serving as seating for audiences watching performances that echoed off the ancient stone. The stepwell was the heart of the village, a place where every practical act of drawing water was intertwined with a spiritual acknowledgement of its divine source. In these incredible structures, you didn't just collect water, you communed with it. You acknowledged its life-giving power through architecture, art, and ritual, creating a seamless tapestry where hydration and holiness were completely and utterly inseparable. This profound integration sets a powerful stage for the other magnificent water marvels we find across the ancient world. While the stepwells of India reached deep into the earth to honor water's sacred source, the ancient Romans took a vastly different but equally reverent approach, channeling water across vast distances to bring its divine essence into the very heart of their bustling cities. Their legendary aqueducts, like the Aqua Pier, the very first of these monumental structures, are often celebrated as cold, rational marvels of engineering, and they were. But to see them only as pragmatic infrastructure is to overlook their soul. For the Romans, the water flowing through those graceful arched channels was not merely H2O. It was a living gift from the gods, a physical manifestation of divine favor that demanded gratitude, celebration, and worship at every turn. This profound belief transformed their entire water system into a continuous sacred landscape. This spiritual dimension was most publicly and beautifully expressed in the Nymphaeum, a type of ornate public fountain that was far more than a place to fill a water jar. These structures were lavish, often semicircular monuments adorned with brilliant mosaics, polished marble, and most importantly, statues of deities. Here you would find Neptune with his trident, but also the myriad local water spirits and nymphs who are believed to inhabit every spring, river, and stream. The aqueduct would deliver water directly to the Nymphaeum, where it would cascade over sculpted figures and into decorative basins before being distributed further. This was the crucial moment of arrival, where the water was presented to the people not as a utility, but as a divine guest entering the city. The line between a public works distribution point and a sacred altar was completely blurred. The engineering itself was an act of devotion. The Romans believed that appeasing these water deities was absolutely essential for the continued health and prosperity of the empire. A failed aqueduct or a contaminated source was not just a technical failure, it was a sign that the gods had been angered. Therefore, the precision required to maintain a constant, gentle slope for the water over dozens of miles, the construction of settling tanks to purify the flow, and the careful selection of mountain springs were all undertaken with a sense of ritual care. The engineers who designed these systems held a dual role, part civil servant and part priest, ensuring that the technical marvel also adhered to spiritual protocols to keep the gods pleased. This approach created a unique civic experience. In a Roman city, the constant, gentle sound of flowing water was the soundtrack of urban life, a permanent auditory reminder of the gods' generosity. The Nymphia became social hubs and places of quiet contemplation, where the sight and sound of water offered a sense of peace and civic pride. Every citizen, from the poorest laborer to the richest senator, partook of this same sacred water, creating a shared communal bond rooted in a recognized divine source. The Roman water system shows us that sacred hydraulics did not always require a descent into the earth. Sometimes it was about lifting water up, both physically and symbolically, and integrating its celebration into the daily rhythm of an entire civilization, proving that even the most practical engineering could be a profound tribute to the elements. Now, let's travel from the grand, human-made aqueducts of Rome to the powerful, natural formations of the Yucatan Peninsula, where the ancient Maya encountered water not as something to be brought forth through engineering, but as a mysterious and terrifying gift from the earth itself. Here, the landscape is pockmarked with cenotes profound, natural sinkholes formed over millennia as soft limestone bedrock collapsed, revealing vast, water-filled caverns beneath. To our modern eyes, these might appear as stunning swimming holes, serene and beautiful, but for the Maya, these were not recreational sites. They were nothing less than the sacred, and often fearsome, gateways to Xibalba, the underworld, a realm of gods, spirits, and ancestors. This belief transformed every cenote into a potent spiritual vortex, the most profound example of water architecture being not built but discovered. The Maya worldview was intimately tied to a cycle of life, death, and rebirth, and water was the essential fluid that governed this entire cosmic process. The rain god Chok was a central figure, a powerful deity depicted with a distinctive curling nose who wielded lightning axes to strike the clouds and bring life-giving storms. But Chok could also withhold his blessings, leading to drought and famine. The cenotes were the critical portals for communicating with him and other deities. They were seen as the mouths of the earth, the points where one could directly access the otherworld and offer gifts to appease the gods. This wasn't a vague superstition, it was a core tenet of their survival. The success of their agriculture, and therefore their entire civilization, depended on the timely arrival of rains, making these aquatic portals the most important sites in their world. The types of offerings made at these sites reveal the depth of their reverence and desperation. Archaeologists dredging the depths of cenotes like the famous sacred cenote at Chichen Itza have brought up a staggering array of artifacts, exquisite jade jewelry, finely crafted gold ornaments, intricately painted ceramics, and gruesomely, the remains of human sacrifices. These weren't casual tosses into the water. They were elaborate rituals. Historical accounts and forensic evidence suggest that victims, often children or young adults believed to be pure, were sometimes adorned in elaborate finery before being offered to the gods. The Maya believed that such a profound sacrifice, the ultimate gift of a human life, was the only thing powerful enough to guarantee the rains would return and nourish their maize fields. The cenote was a conduit, a direct line to the divine where the most valuable possessions and even lives could be sent to secure the community's future. This spiritual significance directly dictated urban planning on a massive scale. The great city of Chichen Itza, one of the most magnificent centers of the Maya world, was quite literally built around the sacred cenote. The entire urban layout was a celestial map, with key ceremonial structures like the massive Pyramid El Castillo, aligned not only with astronomical events like the equinoxes, but also with the location of this water-filled sinkhole. Processional pathways connected the cenote to the temples, creating a ritual landscape where the spiritual power of the underworld water was channeled into the heart of the city's political and religious life. The cenote wasn't on the outskirts, It was the anchor, the reason for the city's location and the source of its authority. This seamless integration shows a complete fusion of geology and theology, where the natural environment was never separate from the spiritual one. The very ground they walked on, and the water that lay beneath it, was alive with meaning, power, and consequence, setting a powerful precedent for how symbolism can be woven directly into the fabric of a civilization's relationship with its environment. From the lush, water-filled cenotes of the Maya, we now journey to the vast, arid plateaus of ancient Persia, a land where the scarcity of water made its presence not just a practical necessity, but a divine miracle. Here, in an environment defined by harsh sun and infrequent rain, Persian engineers performed what might be their greatest marvel, not a structure that reached for the heavens, but one that whispered to the earth, gently coaxing its hidden treasures to the surface. This was the Kanat, a system of underground tunnels that masterfully tapped into mountain aquifers, delivering a steady, life-giving flow of water to the driest of plains. But to call this merely an irrigation technique is to miss its profound spiritual heart. The Kanat was a sacred channel, a physical manifestation of a deep philosophical harmony with nature, a principle central to the prevailing Zoroastrian faith which saw the natural world as a creation to be cherished and protected, not dominated. The entire system was viewed as a direct gift from Anahita, the powerful and revered divinity of waters, fertility, and wisdom. She was often depicted as a beautiful woman flowing with life-giving streams, and it was believed that her benevolence allowed the precious underground water to be found and guided to the people. This wasn't a vague association. It was a deeply held belief that infused the entire process of building and maintaining a Kanat with a sense of sacred duty. The initial discovery of a water source high in the mountains wasn't just a technical survey. It was a moment of spiritual revelation. The chief engineer, known as the Mukani, was more than a technician. He was a diviner, a person of great respect who combined empirical knowledge with an almost priestly intuition to identify where Anahita's gifts could be accessed. The construction itself was a monumental feat of communal effort and precision. Teams of workers would dig a series of vertical shafts down to the water table at the foothills of a mountain, and then from the destination point miles away on the plains, they would painstakingly dig a gently sloping underground tunnel back toward that source, using the vertical shafts for ventilation, debris removal, and alignment. The gradient had to be perfect, too steep, and the water would flow too violently, eroding the tunnel walls, too shallow and it would stagnate. This required an incredible understanding of geometry and physics, passed down through generations. But this technical knowledge was always framed within a context of reverence. The digging of a new Kanat was often preceded by prayers and offerings, and the first flow of water was celebrated as a religious festival, a direct answer to the community's devotion. This sacred relationship didn't end with construction. The maintenance of the Kanat was a continuous ritual of stewardship. The community owned the system collectively, and a designated water custodian would oversee the distribution of water shares for irrigation based on a strict, time-honored schedule, ensuring fairness and preventing waste. The periodic cleaning of the tunnels, essential to prevent siltation, was a communal activity undertaken with a sense of collective responsibility and piety. They weren't just unclogging a pipe, they were purifying a divine conduit, ensuring the continued flow of Anahita's blessing. Even the vertical access shafts, those periodic holes that dot the desert landscape, served a dual purpose. While they were vital for construction and ventilation, they also often became quiet, solitary places for prayer and reflection, small, unintentional shrines where one could feel closer to both the earth and the heavens. The impact of these sacred hydraulics was civilization-sustaining. Vast cities, including the magnificent ceremonial capital of Persepolis, were entirely dependent on Kanat systems for their survival, allowing Persian culture to flourish in an otherwise inhospitable climate. The water that flowed through these tunnels was cool, clean, and protected from evaporation, making it incredibly efficient. For centuries, this technology allowed for the creation of lush gardens, or paradisa, which literally translates to walled garden and is the root of our word paradise. These gardens, with their symmetrically divided channels and abundant fruit trees, were designed as earthly reflections of the divine order and abundance made possible by the Kanat. This ancient innovation stands as a powerful testament to a world where technological brilliance was inseparable from spiritual reverence and environmental ethics, a holistic approach to resource management that we are only now, in our era of climate crisis, beginning to desperately relearn. Beyond the sheer physical presence of these structures, ancient civilizations embedded a hidden language into their water architectures, a symbolic code where every curve, angle, and pattern was a deliberate echo of their deepest cosmic beliefs. This wasn't mere decoration, it was a way of writing mythology into stone and water, transforming functional conduits and basins into profound narrative devices that told the story of the universe itself. The designs were a physical prayer, a diagram of how the world worked, with water always at its sacred center. To understand this is to see these structures not as ruins, but as open books, their pages carved in geometric patterns and flowing shapes that whisper the secrets of a forgotten worldview. Take, for instance, the simple spiral, a shape found carved into stone water channels from Celtic Europe to pre-Columbian America. To our modern eyes, it might look like an artistic flourish, but to these cultures, it was a powerful symbol of the cyclical nature of existence, the journey of water from cloud to river to ocean and back to cloud again, mirroring the human cycle of life, death, and rebirth. A meandering pattern, like the key-shaped designs on Greek fountains, wasn't just a pretty path for water to follow. It was a direct representation of the labyrinthine journey of the soul, a visual metaphor for the twists and turns of a spiritual quest, with the water's flow guiding the way. Even the concentric circles seen in pools from Roman nymphea to Islamic gardens were microcosms of the cosmos, ripples emanating from a single, divine source, much like creation itself. Perhaps one of the most precise examples of this symbolic intent comes from ancient Egypt with the Nilometer. This was not a random measuring stick. It was an elaborately calibrated structure, often a beautifully carved column housed within a stone chamber connected directly to the Nile. The priests would carefully note the river's rise against the etched markings, but they were not merely calculating agricultural yields. They were reading the will of the god Hapi. Each increment on that column represented a level of divine favor. A high flood was Hapi's abundant blessing, promising prosperity, while a low flood was a sign of his displeasure. The Nilometer was, in essence, a communication device with the divine, a piece of sacred architecture that translated a natural phenomenon into a theological message for the entire kingdom. This fusion of sacred geometry and hydraulics reaches its zenith in the Hindu temple tanks of India, known as khans. These are not simple reservoirs. They are meticulously designed as vast stone mandalas, intricate geometric diagrams that represent the entire universe in microcosm. A perfect square, symbolizing the earth and the material world, contains concentric terraces that step down towards a central, circular pool. This pool is the ultimate destination, the symbolic source of all creation, the point where the divine energy of the universe coalesces. The act of descending the steps into the water is a symbolic journey from the outer edges of reality toward the still, silent center of all things. The water itself, sitting at the heart of this geometric perfection, is understood to be the primordial substance from which all life emerges. Every architectural line, every proportion, is calculated not just for structural integrity, but for spiritual potency, making the Khand a machine for meditation and a map of the cosmos, all activated by the presence of water. This symbolic layer is what elevates ancient water architecture from mere engineering to high art and deep spirituality. A canal was never just a ditch. It could be the earthly representation of the Milky Way. A fountain was never just a spout. It could be the eternal spring of life described in myth. A basin was never just for storage. It could be the chaotic primordial ocean from which order emerged. By encoding these myths into the very fabric of their cities, these civilizations created a lived-in mythology. Every time a person drew water, bathed, or simply passed by one of these structures, they were unconsciously participating in a story much larger than themselves, a story that reinforced their place in a sacred, watery universe. This deep, intentional symbolism provided the philosophical blueprint that made the rituals we will explore next not just possible, but powerfully meaningful. These magnificent structures of stone and channel were never meant to be silent or static. They were designed as instruments, and it was through ritual, through ceremony, chant, and communal action that they were truly brought to life. The sacred hydraulics of the ancient world remained dormant until activated by the human spirit, transforming practical infrastructure into a living, breathing interface with the divine. This was the crucial final layer, the belief that the physical flow of water could be guided and blessed by the metaphysical flow of prayer and performance, ensuring that the community and its life source remained in a constant, harmonious dialogue. Consider the grandeur of the Babylonian New Year festival, known as the Aqueducts. This was not a single event but a 12-day-long reenactment of the cosmic order, and water played a central, culminating role. The statues of the city's most powerful gods, including the chief deity Marduk, were not left to gather dust in their temples. They were carefully removed, placed onto ornately decorated ceremonial barges, and then taken in a grand, joyful procession down to the banks of the Euphrates River. There, in a powerful act of symbolic purification, the statues were ritually bathed in the sacred waters. This wasn't about cleaning dust, it was about recharging their divine essence, reaffirming their connection to the primordial waters of creation, and by extension, ensuring the river would continue to flow and nourish the land. The entire hydraulic system of canals that fed Mesopotamia's fields was, in that moment, spiritually validated and renewed by this single, spectacular public ritual. On the other side of the world, the Inca Empire demonstrated a similar fusion of ceremony and engineering at the breathtaking site of Moray. Here, a series of colossal circular terraces sink deep into the earth like a natural amphitheater. Archaeologists believe these were sophisticated agricultural laboratories for developing crop varieties adaptable to different altitudes, but their function was far more than scientific. Carefully engineered aqueducts channeled water from nearby mountain springs to cascade down through the terraces. During important planting festivals, this water flow was the centerpiece of elaborate ceremonies led by priests and nobles. As the water spiraled down from level to level, it was believed to be carrying prayers and offerings to the Pachamama, or Earth Mother, and to the ancestral spirits residing in the underworld. The ritual activated the hydraulic system, blessing the water that would nourish the experimental crops and, by extension, the entire empire's food supply. The ceremony transformed a feat of agricultural engineering into a divine conversation. This interplay is beautifully illustrated in ancient China, where the Dragon Boat Festival remains a vibrant tradition to this day, its origins lying in a much older, sacred purpose. These races were not originally simple sporting competitions. They were held on specifically engineered canals and major rivers during the summer solstice, a time associated with disease and excessive heat. The loud, frantic beating of drums, the synchronized paddling, and the fierce racing of the ornately carved dragon-headed boats were all believed to awaken and appease the powerful river dragons sleeping below the surface. The community believed this cacophony and celebration would encourage these spirits to bring the necessary rains for the summer rice planting season and to prevent droughts and floods. The engineered waterway became a ritual arena, its functional purpose for transportation and irrigation temporarily overshadowed by its primary role as a stage for securing divine favor. These ceremonies ensured that the water architecture never became just a forgotten relic. It was a perpetual participant in the community's relationship with the forces that governed their survival. This holistic integration of water worship into urban planning wasn't confined to isolated temples or wells. It was a principle that shaped the very foundations of entire cities, transforming them into vast, living mandalas where the sacred and the municipal were one and the same. The ancient metropolis of Mohenjo-Daro, one of the world's earliest major urban centers in the Indus Valley, presents a stunning example of this civic-scale devotion. This wasn't a haphazard collection of buildings, it was a meticulously planned grid of streets, baked brick houses, and a sophisticated drainage system that all pointed toward a profound, water-centric civic religion. At its heart stood the Great Bath, a massive, watertight public tank constructed with precise brickwork and sealed with a layer of bitumen. This wasn't a swimming pool for leisure. It was a monumental ritual complex, likely used for purification ceremonies that were central to the community's spiritual life. Surrounding it were rows of smaller baths and hundreds of wells, ensuring that access to clean, ritually significant water was woven into the fabric of everyday existence for its citizens. The entire city's layout, with its advanced water supply and waste management, suggests a society that viewed urban order and spiritual purity as two sides of the same coin, with water as the essential medium connecting them. The alignment of certain structures with astronomical events further deepens this connection, hinting that the city itself was a macrocosm, a terrestrial reflection of a celestial order maintained through hydraulic harmony. Across the globe and millennia later, the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan achieved a similar, breathtaking synthesis of myth, water, and urban design. Built on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, the city was a marvel that left Spanish conquistadors breathless with its grandeur. Its very location was chosen based on a powerful prophecy. The god Huitzilopochtli had instructed the Mexica people to wander until they saw an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a snake. When they witnessed this vision on a swampy island, they knew they had found their destined home. This creation myth was physically enacted through the city's architecture. The sprawling urban center was crisscrossed by a network of canals, functioning much like Venetian waterways, which served as the main arteries for transportation and commerce. But these were more than just practical thoroughfares. They were symbolic recreations of the primordial waters from which their world was born. The most astonishing feat was the development of chinampas, often called floating gardens, though they were actually incredibly fertile artificial islands built by weaving together reeds and stakes and piling them with nutrient-rich lake mud. These chinampas were not only highly productive agricultural engines that fed a massive population, they were also floating plots of sacred earth, their very existence a testament to the Aztec ability to coax life from the water, mirroring their gods' acts of creation. At the city's ceremonial core stood the Templo Mayor, a giant pyramid dedicated to both the rain god Tlaloc and the war god Huitzilopochtli. Here, offerings were cast into sacred wells, and the temple's orientation captured the sun's rays during the equinoxes, creating a direct axis between the heavens, the temple, and the watery underworld beneath the lake. In Tenochtitlan, you couldn't separate the spiritual from the spatial. To draw water, to travel by canal, or to farm on the Chinampas was to participate in a continuous, city-wide ritual. This concept of the city as a cosmic diagram, with water features acting as the axis mundi, the central world pillar connecting all realms of existence, is a recurring theme. In ancient Egypt, the city of Thebes was arranged to reflect the myth of Osiris, with the Nile River itself serving as the primary axis connecting the realms of the living and the dead. The temples on the east bank, bathed in sunlight, were dedicated to gods of creation and life, while the tombs on the west bank, in the setting sun, were the domain of the afterlife. The river was the conduit for both practical travel and the symbolic journey of the soul. Similarly, in Khmer architecture, the city of Angkor Thom was designed as a microcosm of the Hindu universe, with its massive moats representing the cosmic ocean and its central temple mountain, the Bayon, symbolizing the peak of Mount Meru, home of the gods. The water in the moats wasn't just a defensive barrier, it was a sacred boundary between the mundane world and the divine center. This holistic urban approach reveals a fundamental truth about these societies. Sacred hydraulics were not a separate category of architecture, but the very skeleton upon which daily life was built. The placement of a well, the direction of a canal, the design of a public bath, every decision was infused with intentionality, linking the act of drawing water to the movement of the stars and the favor of the gods. This deep integration meant that respect for water was encoded into law, social structure, and routine behavior, fostering a culture of collective stewardship that ensured these complex systems were maintained for generations. It was a seamless existence where one's spiritual duty and civic responsibility were fulfilled by the same action, whether that was maintaining a clean canal or participating in a rain ceremony. This profound connection between urban life and the sacred element of water set the stage for the next logical step: how these designs were not just spiritually profound, but were also brilliant, pragmatic adaptations to the immense environmental challenges these civilizations faced. This profound spiritual connection to water did more than just shape cities. It fundamentally equipped ancient civilizations to thrive within some of the planet's most challenging environments. The sacred nature of their hydraulics was not a barrier to practicality. It was the very engine of their most brilliant climate adaptations. By viewing water as a divine gift, they were compelled to develop systems of incredible ingenuity that worked in harmony with local conditions, not against them, creating a legacy of sustainability born directly from reverence. Nowhere is this marriage of devotion and adaptation more starkly beautiful than in the rose-red city of Petra, the magnificent capital of the Nabateans carved into the desert cliffs of what is now Jordan. In this hyper-arid landscape, rainfall was a rare and precious event, a true act of divine mercy. The Nabateans believed this mercy flowed from their chief deity, Dashara, and their entire water capture system was a continuous act of gratitude and appeasement to him. They transformed their entire city into a massive, intricate water harvesting instrument. They didn't just dig a few wells, they engineered a comprehensive network of terracotta pipes, dams, and channels that lined the towering canyon walls, all designed to capture every single drop of sporadic rainwater that fell on the surrounding plateau. Their most ingenious features were the countless cisterns carved directly into the solid rock, hidden from the evaporating sun, and often decorated with simple carvings or niches for small offerings. These weren't just storage tanks, they were sacred repositories for Dashara's bounty. The system was so precise and efficient that it could channel flash floods from sudden desert storms through a series of diversion dams and silt traps, taming the destructive torrents into a managed, life-sustaining flow that filled their reservoirs and supplied lavish garden plots and public fountains within the city. This allowed Petra to flourish as a lush oasis in the desert, supporting a large population and becoming a dazzling trade hub. Their technological mastery was undeniable, but its driving force was the spiritual imperative to honor and conserve every drop of the god's gift. To waste water would have been a profound sin, a rejection of divine benevolence. This sacred duty fostered a culture of extreme conservation and brilliant environmental adaptation that modern desert cities are still struggling to emulate. On the opposite end of the climatic spectrum, we find the Khmer Empire of Southeast Asia, which faced a completely different challenge, not scarcity, but overwhelming seasonal abundance. Here, the relentless monsoon rains brought annual flooding that could easily wipe out crops and settlements. The Khmer response, rooted in a Hindu-Buddhist cosmology that saw the universe as a balance between cosmic oceans and sacred mountains, was as spiritually profound as it was technically brilliant. At the heart of their hydraulic landscape were the Bare's immense, rectangular reservoirs that are staggering in scale. The West Bare at Anchor, for instance, is an artificial body of water measuring 5 miles long by 1.3 miles wide. To the modern eye, it looks like a massive public works project for flood control and irrigation. But to the Khmer, it was far more. These bares were nothing less than symbolic recreations of the mythical sea of milk from Hindu cosmology, the primordial ocean from which all life and immortality were churned. The water stored within them was not just H2O, it was Amrita, the nectar of immortality. At the center of the largest bares, they built artificial islands topped with temples, which represented Mount Meru, the cosmic home of the gods, rising from the watery chaos. This sacred symbolism dictated the entire system's function. During the monsoon, the bares and a complex network of canals would capture the excess floodwaters, preventing devastation downstream. Then, during the long dry season, the stored water would be meticulously released through gravity-fed channels to irrigate vast rice paddies, ensuring 3 harvests a year and supporting one of the pre-industrial world's largest urban populations. The entire water management system was a continuous ritual act. The flow of water mirrored the cosmic cycle of creation and sustenance, and the king's divine authority was measured by his ability to maintain this hydraulic balance, ensuring both physical and spiritual prosperity for his people. The system was so perfectly adapted to the local climate that it allowed the Anchor civilization to dominate the region for centuries. Their reverence for water as a cosmic force led directly to an ecological understanding that modern engineers now call living with floods, a concept we are only recently readopting as we face our own climate-induced weather extremes. In both the desert and the rainforest, the spiritual framework provided the long-term vision and ethical imperative to create systems that were not merely extractive, but truly symbiotic, designed to last for generations because they were built on a foundation of respect, not exploitation. Behind every one of these magnificent structures stood a unique class of individual, a figure who would seem almost alien in our modern, hyper-specialized world, the priest-engineer. These were the custodians of sacred hydraulics, the living bridge between the divine will and the earthly flow of water. They were not merely technicians who understood slope and volume, nor were they simply holy men who recited prayers. They were both simultaneously, and their interdisciplinary mastery was the essential glue that held these complex systems together for centuries. In ancient Rome, the individual responsible for the aqueducts held the title of Curator Aquarum. This was a position of immense civic power, but it was also deeply intertwined with state religion. When a new aqueduct was completed, its inauguration wasn't just a ribbon-cutting ceremony. It was a full-scale religious festival. The curator, often a high-ranking senator, would don priestly robes to lead the proceedings. He would offer sacrifices to the relevant gods, fauns for springs, Neptune for the sea, and the local nymphs of the water source, beseeching them to bless the flow and keep it pure. The engineering was already a marvel, but without this divine sanction, the water was not considered truly fit for the city. The men who designed the precise gradient of the channels, the ones who calculated the water pressure for the fountains, understood that their work was a form of devotion. A leak or a collapse wasn't just an engineering failure. It was a sign of spiritual discord, a message that the gods had been displeased by some flaw in the ritual or the maintenance. This mindset ensured that the pursuit of technical perfection was driven by a higher calling than mere efficiency. This fusion of roles was perhaps even more formalized in the ancient Indian tradition with the Sthapati, the master architect. A Sthapati was far more than a builder. He was a revered scholar who had mastered a vast body of sacred knowledge known as Vastu Shastra, which governed architecture, design, and spatial geometry in alignment with cosmic principles. When designing a stepwell or a temple tank, his calculations were not solely about structural integrity. He had to ensure the entire design resonated with spiritual harmony. The orientation of the well, the number of steps, the proportions of the carved niches, and the specific placement of deities were all determined by a complex set of rules that connected the structure to the cycles of the sun, the moon, and the constellations. His knowledge of hydraulics, how to ensure the well would fill, how to prevent stagnation, where to place drainage channels, was seamlessly woven into this sacred geometric blueprint. For the Sthapati, there was no distinction between the law of gravity and the flow of divine energy. They were two expressions of the same universal order. His work was a meditation, and the construction site itself was considered a sacred space, often purified with rituals before a single stone was laid. This sacred duty extended down to the most mundane acts of maintenance. The cleaning of a Kanat in Persia or a stepwell in India was not a job for the lowest laborer. It was a vital, respected task often overseen by a community elder or a designated religious figure. Descending into the dark, confined tunnels of a Kanat to clear silt was dangerous work, and it was undertaken with a sense of piety. It was an act of stewardship, a direct service to the goddess Anahita, ensuring her life-giving gift remained pure and abundant. Similarly, the Brahmins in an Indian village might oversee the periodic draining and cleaning of the local stepwell, reciting mantras to purify the water before it was allowed to refill. This culture of respect meant that these systems were not just built with incredible skill, they were maintained with unwavering devotion generation after generation. The role of these custodians created a powerful feedback loop. Their spiritual authority gave them the social standing to organize and direct the massive communal labor required for these projects, while their technical expertise ensured that the systems actually worked, thereby proving the efficacy of the rituals and reinforcing the community's faith. This synergy between tangible results and transcendent belief is what allowed these ancient water technologies to not only function but to flourish, creating a legacy of sustainable management that was as much about ethics as it was about engineering. What's truly astonishing is how this sacred relationship with water gave rise to strikingly similar architectural solutions in cultures that were separated by vast oceans and had no possible contact with one another. It's as if a universal human instinct, a shared reverence for this life-giving element, guided different hands to carve the same prayers into stone and earth. Consider the stepwells of India, those breathtaking inverted temples we explored earlier, and then journey across the world to the volcanic islands of the Canary Islands. Here, the indigenous Guanche people faced a different water challenge. They didn't need to descend into the earth, they needed to capture it from the air. Their ingenious solution was to build elaborate fog-catching structures using piles of volcanic rock arranged in precise patterns. But these weren't just functional traps for condensation. They were ceremonial sites, often aligned with astronomical events, and considered sacred ground where offerings were made to the mountain spirits believed to control the mists. Just as the steps of Chand Bayori led worshippers down to the water, the Guanche's stone labyrinths guided the divine essence of fog to coalesce into liquid life, treating the captured water with the same ritual care as the Hindus did in their subterranean palaces. This pattern of parallel invention extends to underground water systems as well. The Kanats of Persia, those miraculous subterranean channels tapping into mountain aquifers, find a powerful echo thousands of miles away in the acequias of Moorish Spain. When the Moors crossed into the Iberian Peninsula, they brought with them not just advanced engineering knowledge from Persia and the Middle East, but also a deep-seated spiritual and legal framework for water management. The acequias they constructed were gravity-fed irrigation channels that transformed the arid Spanish landscape into a lush, fertile paradise. But like the Kanats, these were not merely ditches. They were governed by a complex code of water law that was deeply infused with Islamic principles of equity, community stewardship, and gratitude to Allah for the provision of water. The distribution of water was overseen by a trusted official, much like the Persian Marab, who ensured fair shares according to a sacred timetable. The system was maintained through communal workdays that were as much about social bonding and religious duty as they were about maintenance. The technological blueprint was nearly identical to the Kanat, a gently sloping underground tunnel ventilated by vertical shafts, but its soul was the same. A recognition that water was a divine gift to be shared justly and managed with reverent care. These echoes suggest something far more profound than mere coincidence or even the diffusion of ideas along ancient trade routes, though that certainly played a part. They point to a fundamental, shared human response to the most essential of elements. Whether in the deserts of Persia, the plateaus of India, or the islands of the Atlantic, humanity independently arrived at the same profound conclusion: that water is not a commodity but a covenant. This universal impulse to sanctify water through architecture created a shared heritage of sacred hydraulics that transcends all geographical and cultural boundaries. It reveals a time when our ancestors, regardless of their gods or their geography, understood that survival was not just a technical challenge but a spiritual partnership with the natural world. This deep-seated, cross-cultural reverence provided the fertile ground from which some of history's most surprising and brilliant technological innovations would eventually grow. This deep, universal reverence for water did far more than just shape beautiful structures. It actually served as the primary engine for some of the most significant technological breakthroughs in the ancient world. The urgent need to honor the divine, to mark sacred time, and to ensure ritual purity provided a powerful motivation to manipulate water with ever greater precision and ingenuity, leading to inventions that would ripple through history. One of the most brilliant minds to emerge from this fusion of faith and physics was the Greek inventor Ctesibius, working in Alexandria during the 3rd century before the Common Era. While he is often celebrated for his work on pneumatics, his most enduring contribution to sacred technology was the refinement of the clepsydra, or water clock. But this was no simple timer. In an era where the schedules of temples, the timing of sacrifices, and the observance of nightly vigils were central to religious life, the inaccurate burning of a candle or the shifting position of a shadow clock would not suffice. Ctesibius's design used a constant, regulated flow of water from a reservoir into a cylindrical container, where a rising float with a pointer could accurately indicate the hour on a scale. This precision allowed for the meticulous observance of sacred times, ensuring that a prayer offered at dawn was truly offered at dawn, that a festival began at the exact astrologically significant moment, and that nightly rituals were synchronized across a city. His invention, born from the need to honor the gods with perfect timing, became a cornerstone of scientific timekeeping for centuries. A similar drive, born from a different spiritual landscape, led to revolutionary advances in agricultural technology in ancient China. Here, the vital task of irrigating rice paddies to feed a massive population was not just a matter of survival. It was an act of maintaining harmony with the natural order and appeasing the powerful dragon deities believed to control rivers and rains. The dragon was not a monster to be feared, but a benevolent, wise force of nature, and honoring it was essential for prosperity. This spiritual framework spurred the invention and widespread adoption of the square pallet chain pump, a device that would become iconic across East Asia. Operated by a team of workers treading on a large, turning wheel, the pump used a continuous chain of square wooden pallets to lift water from a lower irrigation channel up to the level of the fields. The rhythmic, almost ceremonial motion of the workers, the gentle splash of the water, and the sheer communal effort turned the act of irrigation into a performance of devotion. It was a technology that physically lifted life-giving water, a gift from the dragon spirits, to nourish the crops that sustain the community. This machine, which perfectly married practical necessity with spiritual symbolism, remained in use for over 2,000 years, a testament to how effectively devotion could drive sustainable innovation. This pattern, where a ritual need seeds a technological solution that then evolves into a broader application, is perfectly illustrated by the history of the fountain. Its earliest predecessors in medieval Europe were not decorative amenities but baptisteries and ablution fountains in monastic cloisters and church courtyards. These were strictly functional yet deeply symbolic structures, providing water for the sacrament of baptism, which represented spiritual rebirth, and for the ritual washing of hands before prayer. The water's flow was the entire point. It represented the living, moving grace of God. As engineering knowledge advanced during the Renaissance, this sacred starting point blossomed into something spectacular. The same hydraulic principles that fed a simple church font were scaled up with pumps, aqueducts, and precise piping to create the breathtaking fountains of Rome and Florence. Bernini's Four Rivers Fountain in Piazza Navona, for instance, is an undeniable masterpiece of art and engineering, a powerful jet of water supporting an obelisk atop a sculpted mountain. Yet its grandeur, its very existence, can be traced back to the humble need to channel divine grace for a baptism. The elaborate fountains of the Villa d'Este, with their water organs and animated statues, were technological marvels, but they were also expressions of a worldview that saw the control and display of water as a demonstration of humanity's God-given ingenuity and a celebration of creation's abundance. These historical precedents present a compelling argument against the modern notion that spirituality and science, or faith and functionality, are opposing forces. In the ancient and pre-modern world, they were deeply intertwined, two sides of the same coin. The desire to understand and honor the divine directly fueled the desire to understand and manipulate the physical world, leading to engineering breakthroughs that were both practically effective and ethically grounded. The water clock ensured sacred time was kept, the chain pump honored the dragon while feeding the people, and the fountain evolved from a vessel of ritual to a celebration of beauty and power. This synergy suggests that the most enduring and humane technologies are often those that serve a higher purpose than mere efficiency or profit, those that are built on a foundation of respect for the natural world and its cycles. The brilliance of these systems lay in their ability to answer a spiritual question with a physical solution, creating a feedback loop where better technology enabled more profound worship, and deeper reverence inspired ever more ingenious designs. This holistic way of thinking, which seamlessly wove together the ethical and the practical, would soon face a formidable challenge as the world pivoted toward a new, secularized vision of progress. Yet for all their brilliance and resilience, these sacred systems could not withstand the tidal wave of change that swept across the globe with the rise of the modern era. A profound shift in world-view began to take hold, one that would systematically dismantle the ancient bond between water and worship. This decline wasn't a sudden collapse but a slow, insidious erosion driven by three powerful forces: industrialization, which reduced nature to a machine; colonialism, which dismissed indigenous knowledge as primitive superstition; and secular governance, which prioritized economic utility over spiritual ecology. Together, they transformed water from a living, divine entity into a cold, calculable resource, a commodity to be extracted, controlled, and sold. The impact of colonial rule offers some of the most stark examples of this disconnect. When the British arrived in India, they encountered the Stepwells, these magnificent subterranean temples that had served communities for centuries. But through their utilitarian lens, the British saw only inefficiency. They couldn't comprehend the spiritual and social function of these structures. To them, a well was simply a hole in the ground to draw water. They preferred the mechanical efficiency of modern piped systems and bore wells, which could be easily monitored and controlled. As a result, they classified the Stepwells as unsanitary, labeling them breeding grounds for disease and discouraging their use. Colonial administration withdrew funding for their maintenance, and traditional community management systems were dismantled. Without the rituals, the care, and the reverence that had sustained them, these architectural marvels were abandoned. They slowly filled with silt, their intricate carvings were vandalized, and they became forgotten relics, their steps crumbling into obscurity. A once vibrant nexus of community life, ritual, and water stewardship was left to decay, simply because its value could not be measured in gallons per minute or economic output. This utilitarian mindset only intensified with the dawn of large-scale industrialization and the modern nation-state. The rise of secular governance meant that water management was handed over to engineers and bureaucrats operating under a new creed: maximum yield, minimum cost. Grand hydrological projects like massive dams and continent-spanning aqueducts became symbols of national pride and human triumph over nature. In the process, the sacred geography of entire regions was often obliterated. The construction of the Aswan High Dam in Egypt, for instance, was a technological marvel that promised to tame the Nile's floods and generate enormous power. But it also submerged countless ancient temples and archaeological sites, permanently altering the river's natural cycle that had been the heartbeat of Egyptian spiritual life for millennia. The annual flood, once celebrated as the god Hapi's blessing, was now a controlled event managed by a panel of engineers. The river was reduced to a mere source of hydroelectric watts and cubic meters of irrigation water, its mythic power severed by concrete and steel. This systemic shift had a devastating impact on the cultural knowledge systems that had maintained these sacred hydraulics for generations. The priest-engineers, the Esthepotes, the Mukanis, these custodians of both spiritual and technical wisdom, found their roles obsolete. Their knowledge, passed down orally through generations, was not written into engineering textbooks or incorporated into modern civil codes. When an elder who remembered the prayers for cleansing a Kanat passed away, that ritual was often lost forever. When a community was displaced by a reservoir project, the intimate, place-based knowledge of local springs, rainfall patterns, and ceremonial practices simply vanished. Water was stripped of its stories, its songs, and its saints, becoming an anonymous chemical compound in a centralized distribution network. We began to relate to water through meters and bills, rather than through stories and festivals. The consequences of this great severance are now impossible to ignore. Our modern water crises, the depleted aquifers, the poisoned rivers, the catastrophic floods, are not just engineering failures, they are spiritual crises. They are the direct result of a relationship based purely on extraction and domination, rather than reciprocity and reverence. We managed water as a slave, and we are now witnessing its rebellion. The very word resource implies something to be used up, while the ancient concept of sacred source implies something to be protected and nurtured. This forgotten distinction lies at the heart of our current ecological predicament. Understanding how we lost this deep, spiritual connection is not an exercise in nostalgia. It is the essential first step toward understanding why we must urgently work to reclaim it. Yet amidst the decay brought by this age of forgetting, a powerful counter-movement is now rising from the very communities that never fully lost their connection to these sacred sources. This isn't about nostalgia, it's a pragmatic and deeply spiritual revival, a global effort to breathe life back into these ancient systems, recognizing that their value extends far beyond history. They are vital blueprints for our survival. Leading this charge in India is the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, known as INTAC, which has undertaken the Herculean task of restoring the country's forgotten stepwells. Their work is a meticulous blend of archaeology, traditional engineering, and community activism. Teams of experts and local volunteers first undertake the painstaking process of removing decades, sometimes centuries, of accumulated silt and debris, a physical unclogging that is also a symbolic act of remembering. Then comes the delicate structural stabilization, using traditional materials and methods to ensure authenticity. But the most crucial part of the process is the reintegration of these spaces back into the daily life of the community. A restored stepwell like Delhi's own Rajan Kai Baoli doesn't just become a protected monument behind a fence. It is revived as a functional water source, a cool community gathering spot during brutal summer heat, and a stage for cultural events, music, and festivals that reactivate its original social and spiritual heartbeat. This model proves that preservation is not about freezing a structure in time, but about re-weaving it back into the living fabric of society, allowing its dual purpose, practical and sacred, to flourish once more. This return to ancestral wisdom is equally urgent in the cradle of the Kanat, modern-day Iran, which is facing a water crisis of catastrophic proportions after decades of reliance on deep, unsustainable well drilling that has drained ancient aquifers. In a powerful pivot, the government and local communities are now looking back to the very technology that allowed their ancestors to thrive in the desert. There is a major push to rehabilitate thousands of kilometers of neglected Kanat tunnels, a move that is as much about cultural preservation as it is about drought mitigation. Specialized crews, often descended from the original Mukani families, are using a combination of traditional knowledge and modern tools like GPS to map and clear these subterranean channels. The result is nothing short of transformative. As the Kanats are cleared and the water begins to flow again, it doesn't just irrigate fields, it revitalizes entire villages that had been abandoned due to water scarcity. The social structure around the water custodian, the Marab, is being reinstated, fostering a renewed sense of communal responsibility and shared ownership over this precious resource. This isn't a rejection of modernity, but a synthesis, a recognition that the old ways, born from a sacred duty to steward water, offer a more sustainable and equitable path forward than the extractive models that have brought the region to the brink. The global significance of this revival has been powerfully affirmed by UNESCO, which has placed a growing number of these hydraulic systems on its World Heritage List. This isn't just an honorary title, it's a crucial tool for preservation. The inscription of the Persian Kanat system, for example, encompasses 11 representative examples across Iran, recognizing them as a masterpiece of human creative genius that bears exceptional testimony to a cultural tradition. This international designation provides a protective shield against destructive development, unlocks funding for conservation, and sparks global tourism that brings economic benefits to local communities. Similarly, the inclusion of India's Rani Ki Vav Stepwell on the list transformed it from an obscure ruin into a point of national pride and a major tourist destination, ensuring its story is told to the world. This UNESCO recognition validates a crucial idea that these are not just regional curiosities, but part of humanity's shared heritage, offering universal lessons in resilience, sustainability, and the profound art of living in harmony with nature. This growing revival movement, stitching together the efforts of archaeologists, engineers, local communities, and global institutions, makes a compelling case that the sacred hydraulics of the past are far more than historical footnotes. They are living libraries of proven ecological wisdom. In an era of climate uncertainty, their passive cooling systems, their reliance on gravity rather than fossil fuels, their community-based management models, and their inherent respect for the natural water cycle present a radically different and perhaps more sane approach to resource management. They demonstrate that the most advanced technology is not always the most complex. Sometimes it is the most elegant and the most respectful. By reviving these structures, we are not just preserving the past, we are actively mining it for solutions, paving the way for a future where our infrastructure can once again be infused with meaning, beauty, and a deep, enduring reverence for the source of all life. This re-enchantment of our built environment is not happening in a vacuum. It is a direct response to the growing yearning for meaning and connection in our increasingly urbanized and digital lives. Architects and urban planners are now looking back to those ancient principles, not to copy them literally, but to translate their essence for the modern world. They are asking a profound question: what would sacred hydraulics look like in the 21st century? The answer is emerging in a wave of stunning projects that seamlessly blend cutting-edge technology with deep ecological and symbolic awareness. One of the most powerful approaches is through biomimicry, where design doesn't just use nature but learns from its forms and processes. Imagine a building's wastewater treatment system that doesn't rely on hidden, chemical-heavy plants, but is modeled on the natural filtration of a wetland, with water visibly meandering through a landscape of reeds and gravel, being purified by microbes and plants in a living, breathing process that anyone can witness and understand. This isn't just efficient, it's a daily lesson in the natural water cycle, a quiet performance that inspires awe and respect for the element it cleanses. It turns a utilitarian necessity into a sacred act of restoration, mirroring the ancient belief that water must be honored and purified. We see this philosophy brought to life on a grand scale at Singapore's Gardens by the Bay. While its futuristic supertrees often steal the spotlight, the entire site is a masterclass in modern sacred hydraulics. Water is the central protagonist here. A series of interconnected lakes and canals form the project's lifeblood, but they are far more than drainage. They are carefully engineered to collect and channel rainwater, which is then used for irrigation throughout the gardens, creating a closed, sustainable loop. But the true magic is in the experience. The largest water body, the Dragonfly Lake, is named for the insects it attracts, highlighting its role as a thriving ecosystem. Visitors stroll along its shores, cross over graceful bridges, and witness the water reflecting the towering super trees and the city skyline. The sound of water is ever present, from the gentle lapping of waves to the dramatic crescendo of the rain vortex at the Cloud Forest Conservatory, the world's tallest indoor waterfall. This colossal waterfall is powered by rainwater collected from the very dome that surrounds it, a breathtaking feat of engineering that serves as a powerful, visible symbol of the water cycle. It doesn't just cool the air, it captivates the spirit, evoking the same sense of wonder and tranquility that ancient civilizations sought in their sacred springs and temple tanks. It is a space that feels both futuristic and deeply primal, demonstrating that a city's infrastructure can be both highly functional and profoundly soul-nourishing. Beyond these large-scale civic projects, individual architects are also explicitly weaving historical motifs into their designs, creating a tangible bridge between past and present. Some are designing private homes where rainwater is channeled from the roof along a beautiful sculptural chain descent, a modern interpretation of the traditional Japanese kusari doi into a waiting basin or a tranquil koi pond, making the capture of a rain shower a visible, almost ceremonial event. Others are creating public plazas with runnels and channels etched into the stone pavement, guiding rainwater away from storm drains and instead directing it to nourish surrounding gardens, subtly referencing the acequias of old while teaching pedestrians about sustainable urban drainage. This is not mere aesthetics, it is a form of architectural storytelling. By referencing these ancient forms, designers are inviting us to remember. They are embedding a cultural memory of water worship into glass, steel, and concrete, ensuring that even in the heart of a bustling metropolis, we are reminded of our enduring connection to this elemental force. This trend signals a pivotal shift away from hiding our water infrastructure behind concrete walls and toward celebrating it as the central artery of life that it truly is, suggesting that the wisdom of the past holds the key to building more resilient, meaningful, and beautiful cities for the future. Beyond the profound historical and environmental lessons, these ancient water-centric spaces held a power that resonates with something deep within us even today, a profound impact on our psychological well-being and social fabric. This isn't merely an abstract idea, it's a tangible effect that modern science is only now beginning to quantify and understand. The gentle, rhythmic sound of water trickling through a stone channel, the sight of sunlight dappling on a still, reflective pool, the tactile experience of cool water on skin, these sensory engagements are not accidental byproducts of sacred hydraulics. They were and are essential components of their design, intentionally crafted to soothe the human spirit and pull people together. In our contemporary world, characterized by digital noise, urban stress, and a pervasive sense of disconnection, the psychological benefits of such spaces feel more vital than ever. Consider the exquisite refinement of the Japanese garden, a direct descendant of Shinto beliefs that see spirits, or kami, residing in natural elements like rocks, trees, and water. The design of these gardens is a masterclass in curated tranquility. A stream isn't just a water feature, it's a carefully orchestrated journey. Water is guided over stones to create specific sounds, from a soft murmur to a lively chatter, each chosen for its psychological effect. The purpose is Shinrin Yoku, or forest bathing, a concept that promotes mental clarity and stress reduction through immersion in nature. The act of sitting beside a tsukubai, a stone water basin used for ritual purification before a tea ceremony, forces a moment of pause, a physical bow that centers the mind and washes away the clutter of daily life. This isn't just tradition, it's applied environmental psychology. Studies now confirm what these ancient practices have long known. Exposure to the sight and sound of moving water can significantly lower cortisol levels, reduce heart rate, and ease anxiety. The human brain seems hardwired to find a sense of safety and calm in the presence of fresh water, a relic of our evolutionary past where it signified the promise of survival. This individual sense of peace naturally expands outward to foster powerful social cohesion. A restored stepwell in India is a perfect testament to this phenomenon. Once a crumbling ruin, a structure like Agrasen Kai Baoli in Delhi, after careful conservation, doesn't just hold water again, it holds people. It becomes a coveted sanctuary from the city's oppressive heat and frantic pace. You'll find students studying on its steps, friends sharing conversations in its cool, shaded galleries, and artists finding inspiration in its ancient symmetry. It has regained its role as a vital third place, a community hub that is neither home nor work, but a neutral ground for social connection. The very architecture facilitates this. The step design creates a natural amphitheater, perfect for impromptu performances, community meetings, or cultural festivals that reactivate the space with shared joy and collective memory. This rebuilding of social capital is perhaps the most significant impact of all. In an age of digital isolation and weakening community bonds, these spaces provide a physical anchor for real, face-to-face interaction, rebuilding the social fabric one conversation at a time. This isn't merely a nostalgic feeling, it's a neurological response. Research in environmental psychology points to a concept known as biophilia, which suggests that humans possess an innate tendency to seek connections with nature and other forms of life. Spaces that honor natural elements, particularly water, tap directly into this instinct. They promote not just relaxation but also empathy and a diminished sense of self-centeredness. Gazing into the vast, reflective surface of a sacred tank or listening to the endless journey of a stream can induce a mildly meditative state, quieting the ego and fostering a feeling of being part of something much larger than oneself. This shift in perspective is the antithesis of the alienation that defines so much of modern life, where we are often separated from the sources of our water, our food, and our energy. These ancient architectures counter that by making our dependence on and connection to the natural world utterly undeniable and beautifully present. Therefore, the argument for reintegrating this reverence into our modern design extends far beyond aesthetics or historical preservation. It becomes an urgent matter of public health and social resilience. We have built cities of glass and steel that too often ignore the human need for natural connection, leading to what author Richard Louv termed nature deficit disorder. The stress, the anxiety, the loneliness that plague modern society are in part symptoms of this disconnect. By consciously designing our contemporary environments to include water features that are more than decorative spaces that are accessible, sensory, and perhaps even quietly ceremonial, we can begin to heal this rift. Imagine a public plaza where harvested rainwater cascades down a sculptural feature, inviting touch and contemplation. Picture an urban library with a quiet interior courtyard featuring a recirculating stream, offering a moment of calm amidst the chaos. These are not extravagant luxuries, they are investments in our collective mental and social well-being, modern interpretations of an ancient wisdom that understood our environment shapes not just our bodies, but our minds and our communities. This profound relationship with water that we've traced through architecture and ritual points towards something even deeper, a universal philosophical current that runs through human consciousness itself. Across countless traditions, water has served as the ultimate mirror, not just reflecting our image back to us, but reflecting the very nature of our existence, our minds, and our souls. Its unique physical properties, its fluidity, its clarity, its ability to both give and take shape, have made it the perfect metaphor for exploring life's biggest questions. Ancient philosophies didn't just use water, they thought with it, using its essence to model the workings of the inner self and the universe, and this metaphysical understanding directly shaped the spaces they built for contemplation. Consider the central Buddhist concept of impermanence, the idea that all things are in a constant state of flux, and that attachment to what is fleeting is the root of suffering. What better symbol for this than water? A river is never the same from one moment to the next. It flows, changes, and moves on. This wasn't just a poetic observation. It informed the design of monastic complexes throughout Southeast Asia. Monasteries were often built alongside rivers or incorporated channels and pools into their courtyards. The purpose was to provide a constant, gentle, auditory reminder of this core teaching. The never-ending murmur of moving water was a living sermon on impermanence, a sensory aid for monks in meditation, helping them to visualize the transient flow of thoughts, sensations, and life itself, and to practice non-attachment. The architecture framed the water not as a static resource, but as a teacher. In beautiful contrast, the Christian tradition often emphasized water's purifying qualities, its power to wash away sin and mark a spiritual rebirth. This is most vividly enacted in the sacrament of baptism, but it profoundly influenced sacred architecture as well. The early Christian baptistry was not a simple font. It was often a separate, centrally planned building housing a deep pool. To be fully immersed in this water was to symbolically drown the old, sinful self and be resurrected into a new life in Christ. The architecture created a powerful journey. The catechumen would descend steps into the water, undergo the rite, and ascend out the other side, physically enacting a metaphysical transformation. The water itself was treated as holy, a conduit of divine grace. This symbolism extended to the holy water stoop at the entrance of a church, where the faithful would dip their fingers upon entering, a small ritual of purification that prepared them to cross from the profane world outside into the sacred space within. Here, water acts as a threshold, a metaphysical cleanser for the soul. Perhaps the most elegant architectural expression of water as a mirror for consciousness is found in the Islamic Chahar Bagh, or Paradise Garden. These gardens are structured around a central axis with 4 flowing channels of water, representing the 4 rivers of paradise described in the Quran. But their most captivating feature is often the reflecting pool. This pool is far more than a decorative element. Its perfectly still, glassy surface acts as a literal and philosophical mirror. It captures the sky, the surrounding architecture, and the viewer themselves, creating a blurred, beautiful line between reality and reflection, between the earthly realm and the promised heavenly one. To stroll beside such a pool is to be invited into a state of deep contemplation. The still water encourages a still mind, reflecting back not just the image of the person looking in, but also the tranquility of the garden itself. It becomes a tool for introspection, a quiet suggestion that to find paradise, one must first look within and cultivate inner peace. The garden, through its water, becomes a map for the soul's journey toward harmony. This perspective fundamentally shifts how we see these ancient structures. They were not just buildings that used water, they were 3-dimensional models of a philosophical understanding of reality. Water was the active ingredient in this alchemy, the element that could make abstract concepts tangible. Its fluidity could teach impermanence, its cleansing power could enact spiritual rebirth, and its perfect stillness could mirror a tranquil mind. In every case, the physical interaction with water in these architecturally framed settings was designed to trigger a metaphysical shift in consciousness, to connect the outer experience of the element with the inner world of the self. This deep, intentional linking of element, architecture, and psyche reveals a sophistication that goes far beyond simple utility, showing us that for these civilizations, building with water was ultimately a way of building a better, more reflective human being. While the vast empires of Rome and Persia built monumental aqueducts and kanats that served entire cities, the sacred relationship with water found a completely different, yet equally powerful, expression in the misty landscapes of Celtic Europe. Here, reverence was not centralized or imperial, but deeply, intimately local. Scattered across the rolling hills of Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and Cornwall are thousands of holy wells, unassuming springs where the divine was found not in grandeur, but in the quiet whisper of water emerging from the earth. These were not the projects of kings or empires, but of villages and families, representing a profoundly decentralized form of sacred hydraulics where every community had its own direct portal to the other world. The belief was simple yet potent. These wells were not just sources of water, they were inhabited. Some were seen as the homes of ancient, pre-Christian spirits of the land, while others were later rededicated to specific Catholic saints, creating a fascinating blend of pagan folklore and Christian devotion that has persisted for over 1,000 years. The physical design of these sites reveals a subtle, thoughtful form of engineering entirely in service of ritual. Unlike the massive stone complexes of India or Rome, the intervention was often minimal yet deliberate. A well would typically be encircled by a low wall of stone, sometimes capped with a large, flat slab that created a defined, sacred space around the point where the water bubbled forth. More elaborate sites might feature a simple stone arch or a small structure to shelter the water. The real ingenuity, however, lay in the channels. The Celts would often carefully guide the water's flow away from the main source using small, hand-laid stone conduits. This wasn't for irrigation or supply, but to create a specific ritual experience. The channel would direct the water into a shallow stone basin, perfectly positioned for a pilgrim to easily cup their hands, wash their face, or drink deeply. This gentle engineering ensured the water remained clean and accessible, transforming a natural seep into a functional shrine. The most hauntingly beautiful and enduring ritual associated with these wells is the hanging of klutis or prayer rags. A pilgrim seeking healing, usually for a specific ailment, would first wash the affected part of their body with the well's water. Then they would take a strip of cloth, the kluti, often taken from the clothing of the sick person, and tie it to a tree or bush growing nearby. This act was a powerful sympathetic magic. As the rag was left exposed to the elements, slowly fraying and disintegrating in the wind and rain, so too, it was believed, would the illness fade from the person who left it. Over time, a single tree could become draped in hundreds of these fading, colorful petitions, creating a visually stunning and deeply moving tapestry of human hope and vulnerability. Other offerings were common too. Bent coins pressed into the surrounding stones for luck, small crutches left behind by those who believed they were healed, or simple prayers whispered over the water's surface. This hyper-local devotion created a spiritual map where every hill, valley, and village had its own sacred source, each with its own unique story, saint, and purported power. One well might be specifically sought for healing eye ailments, while another was visited by women hoping for fertility. The feast day of the well's associated saint would become a local festival, a pattern day where communities would gather for a collective pilgrimage, followed by music, storytelling, and celebration. This decentralized model fostered an incredibly resilient and personal form of worship. It didn't require vast wealth or centralized priesthood. It thrived on individual faith and community tradition. The survival of these practices, often quietly continuing even during periods of religious suppression, speaks to the intense personal connection they fostered. They show us that the impulse to sanctify water doesn't always require monumental architecture. Sometimes it flourishes most powerfully in a simple, clear spring, a strip of cloth, and a whispered prayer, proving that the smallest point of water can hold an ocean of meaning. Now let's journey from the misty holy wells of Celtic Europe to the sun-drenched valley of Mexico, where the Aztecs engineered one of the most productive and spiritually resonant agricultural landscapes the world has ever known, the floating gardens of Xochimilco. When the Spanish conquistadors first laid eyes on the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, they were astounded. They described a city that seemed to float on a great lake, crisscrossed by bustling canals and adorned with gleaming white temples, a vision so magnificent they wondered if they were dreaming. At the heart of this aquatic metropolis was a revolutionary farming technology that was also a profound act of worship, the chinampa. These were not floating gardens in the literal sense, but rather incredibly fertile artificial islands built on the shallow lake beds of Lake Xochimilco. The construction was a masterclass in sustainable engineering. Workers would first stake out a rectangular plot in the marshy lakebed using ahujot trees, a type of native willow whose roots would naturally weave into a strong, living net. They would then layer the enclosure with mud dredged from the lake bottom, which was rich in organic matter and nutrients, and stack it with aquatic vegetation like reeds and algae. This layered sandwich of mud and plant matter would compost in place, creating a deeply fertile, perpetually renewing soil matrix that was resistant to drought and could yield up to 7 harvests a year. But to see the chinampas as merely an efficient farming technique is to miss their entire spiritual significance. This entire system was a physical reenactment of the Aztec creation myth. The Aztecs believed their world had been created from the primordial waters by the gods Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca. The act of building land from the lake, of coaxing order and fertility from the watery chaos, was a direct imitation of this divine act. The water that sustained the chinampas was the domain of Tlaloc, the formidable rain god who could bring life-giving showers or devastating droughts and floods. His favor was not taken for granted. The chinampas were therefore not just crop fields, they were sprawling, open-air temples dedicated to his worship. Ceremonial platforms dotted the landscape, and the canals themselves served as sacred processional routes. During major festivals dedicated to Tlaloc and the maize goddess Chichimequotl, priests would lead vibrant, colorful processions of canoes through the waterways, carrying effigies of the gods and making offerings of maize, amaranth, and even precious objects to ensure a bountiful harvest. The very act of farming, of planting seeds in the earth drawn from the lake, was a daily ritual, a cooperation with the gods to maintain the cosmic order. Today, in the southern boroughs of Mexico City, remnants of this ancient system still persist, a hauntingly beautiful and resilient echo of the Aztec world. Though much of Lake Xochimilco was drained by the Spanish, a network of canals covering over 180 square kilometers remains, a UNESCO World Heritage Site known as the last major wetland in the vast Mexico City basin. Here you can still glide along the tranquil canals on brightly colored traginaras, flat-bottomed boats pulled by local guides, witnessing a way of life that has endured for centuries. You'll see farmers tending to their plots just as their ancestors did, harvesting flowers, vegetables, and maize from the rich soil of the chinampas. The ahujot trees still stand sentinel along the water's edge, their roots still holding the land together. This is not a static museum piece. It is a living, breathing landscape that continues to provide ecological services to one of the world's largest megacities. The canals act as a crucial aquifer recharge zone, help mitigate flooding, and provide a vital refuge for endemic species, including the critically endangered axolotl, a salamander revered by the Aztecs and now a symbol of Mexican biological and cultural heritage. The survival of Xochimilco is a powerful testament to the enduring wisdom of sacred design, but it also stands on a precarious precipice, facing immense threats from urban sprawl, groundwater extraction, and pollution. This makes it not just a historical case study, but an urgent lesson for our current ecological crises. The Chinampa system is a brilliant example of what we now call circular economy. It produced no waste. The nutrient-rich muck from the canal bottoms was the fertilizer for the gardens, and the crops themselves helped stabilize the aquatic environment. It required no fossil fuels, relying instead on human labor and renewable biological systems. This closed-loop regenerative model, born from a worldview that saw humans as partners in a sacred ecology, offers a stark contrast to modern industrial agriculture, which is often defined by linear extraction, chemical inputs, and soil depletion. The preservation of Xochimilco is more than cultural nostalgia. It is a living laboratory for sustainable urban food production, water management, and biodiversity conservation, demonstrating that the most advanced solutions for our future may well be rooted in the devotional practices of the past. Beyond the physical form of canals and reservoirs, the very essence of these ancient water systems was often poured from the vessel of myth. Civilizations didn't just build with water, they built with story, weaving the grand narratives of their gods and creation into the very fabric of their hydraulic architecture. These myths were far more than entertaining tales. They were the foundational blueprints that provided a moral and ecological framework for survival, transforming functional structures into profound lessons in resilience, respect, and humanity's place within the natural world. A powerful and nearly universal example of this is the prevalence of flood myths. From the Epic of Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia to the story of Noah in the Hebrew Bible, and from the deluge tales of the Maya to those of indigenous Australian cultures, societies worldwide told stories of a great reset, a divine punishment or cleansing that wiped the slate clean with water. These weren't stories of passive fear, they were catalysts for action. They encoded a collective memory of real climatic catastrophes and the urgent need to protect against them, directly inspiring some of history's most ambitious water management projects. In ancient China, this narrative took a very specific and heroic form with the legend of Yu the Great. The myth tells of a catastrophic, endless flood that inundated the land, a chaos that previous rulers failed to quell. Yu was given the monumental task of taming the waters, but unlike his father, who tried to simply dam them and failed, Yu employed a strategy of drainage and channeling. He spent 13 arduous years dredging new riverbeds and directing the floodwaters to the sea, so dedicated to his work that he passed by his own house 3 times without entering. For his success, he was not only praised but made emperor, founding the Xia dynasty. This story is far more than a folktale. It is a mythic endorsement of a specific hydraulic philosophy, one of working with the water's flow rather than against it. This narrative directly inspired and legitimized the massive, state-organized construction of dikes, canals, and irrigation systems across China. To build a levee was not just an engineering task, it was to participate in the legacy of Yu, to embody the virtues of perseverance, wisdom, and benevolent leadership. The architecture itself became a national story of order triumphing over chaos, a physical manifestation of a cultural value system preached for generations around campfires and in temples. A different kind of water myth, one of cyclical blessing rather than catastrophic punishment, shaped the civilization of ancient Egypt. Here, the annual inundation of the Nile was not a fearsome deluge but the predictable, life-giving breath of the god Hapi. This event was the central rhythm of Egyptian life, and their entire spiritual and architectural world was oriented around it. The flood was believed to be the tears of the goddess Isis, mourning her husband Osiris, or the result of Hapi's release of the primordial waters from the caverns of the underworld. This narrative framed the flood not as a destructive force to be walled off, but as a divine gift to be welcomed, measured, and celebrated. This belief directly dictated their architecture. Temples were oriented with their gateways facing the rising river, as if opening their arms to receive Hapi's bounty. Structures like the famous Nilometer on Elephantine Island were elegant stone staircases descending into the river, with precise cubit markings etched into the walls. Priests would use these to measure the flood's height, but this was a sacred act, not a bureaucratic one. The reading told them not just how much farmland would be fertilized, but the level of the god's favor. A high flood meant prosperity and a testament to the pharaoh's divine right to rule, while a low flood signaled divine discontent. This intertwining of myth and masonry ensured that every generation understood the ecological contract they were part of. The stories embedded in the stones taught that water was a powerful, conscious force that demanded respect and careful stewardship. The myth of Yu the Great taught that controlling water required intelligence and cooperation with nature's logic, not brute force. The story of Hapi taught that water was a benevolent but conditional gift, one that required gratitude and precise observation. These narratives provided a compelling reason to maintain complex systems of dikes and canals for centuries. It was a sacred duty, a way of honoring the gods and the heroes of old. The architecture became a constant physical reminder of these lessons, ensuring that the moral of the story was never forgotten. A farmer walking along a Chinese dike was walking in the footsteps of a demigod. A priest descending the steps of a Nilometer was communing directly with a deity. This deep, mythic underpinning is what made these structures so much more than engineering. It made them the soul of a culture, a timeless dialogue between humanity, the element that sustained them, and the stories that gave that sustenance meaning. If the engineering of these structures was the body, then the art that adorned them was undoubtedly the soul, a visual language of devotion carved, painted, and inscribed into every available surface. This was not mere decoration added as an afterthought. It was an integral, essential layer of the design, a way to transform functional hydraulic sites into immersive, three-dimensional scriptures that communicated myth, recorded history, and elevated the act of drawing water into a profound spiritual encounter. From the grandest imperial bath to the humblest village well, art served as the permanent voice of these places, ensuring that every interaction with water was also an interaction with culture, faith, and memory. Consider the sheer sensory overload of entering a large Roman bath complex like the baths of Caracalla. The engineering that brought the water was a marvel, but the experience was defined by the art. The floors and walls shimmered with intricate mosaics, a vast underwater menagerie of dolphins, sea monsters, and tritons crafted from countless colored tiles. Grand statues of Neptune, mighty and bearded, stood presiding over the pools, his marble gaze overseeing the bathers. In smaller niches, more intimate representations of local water nymphs watched over the individual fountains. This wasn't just a place to get clean, it was a symbolic plunge into the realm of the sea gods themselves. The art created a complete mythological universe, a daily reminder that the water flowing from the aqueducts was a divine gift. The functional act of bathing was thus wrapped in a narrative that connected the citizen to the pantheon, making civic infrastructure a personal spiritual experience. This practice of encoding narrative into architecture finds perhaps its most detailed expression in the Stepwells of India. Here, the very act of descent was a journey through a sacred text. The walls of structures like Rani Kai Vav are not simply carved, they are entirely covered, every inch a testament to both artistic skill and pious intention. Hundreds of major sculptural niches house serene, larger-than-life statues of deities: Vishnu sleeping on the cosmic serpent, Shiva in deep meditation, the goddess Durga in her triumphant aspect. Between them, celestial nymphs known as apsaras dance in eternal grace, their stone garments seeming to flow with movement. But beyond the grand figures, it is the countless smaller reliefs and, most importantly, the inscriptions that tell a deeper story. Donors, from kings to common merchants, would commission a specific sculpture or section of the well, and their gifts were recorded in elegant Sanskrit script. These inscriptions are not boastful, they are devotional, stating the donation was made for the religious merit of the donor and their family. This transformed the Stepwell from a public works project into a collective act of faith, a library of generosity where every pillar and panel whispered a prayer for its creator, ensuring their legacy was forever tied to the life-giving source they helped to build. This fusion of literacy and hydraulics reached a fascinating apex with the Maya and their sacred cenotes. While the sinkholes themselves were natural formations, their significance was carved into being. At the sacred cenote at Chichen Itza, archaeologists have recovered artifacts that speak of profound offerings, but the most direct accounts come from the hieroglyphic texts found at the site. Stone monuments and temple walls feature intricate panels of glyphs that narrate specific rituals performed at the cenote. They record dates, name the participating rulers and priests, and describe the nature of the offerings made to the rain god Chok, jade, gold, and, in summer passages, human lives. The water itself was the medium for the ritual, but the stone carvings were the permanent record, ensuring that the act of communication with the gods was not lost to the depths. The Maya merged the power of the written word with the power of the sacred water, creating a lasting testament that their most vital conversations with the divine happened at this aquatic portal. This artistic legacy fundamentally changed the nature of these spaces. A stepwell was more than a water source. It was a subterranean art gallery and a library of devotion. A Roman bath was more than a public utility. It was a museum of maritime mythology. A Mayan cenote was more than a natural well. It was a chapter in a stone book. The art and inscriptions elevated these structures from purely practical endeavors to the level of cultural treasure. They provided a multi-sensory education in cosmology and ethics for anyone who visited, regardless of their literacy. The aesthetics were never just for beauty's sake. They were in service of a spiritual goal: to inspire awe, to encourage reverence, and to remind all who came that the water they were about to use was cherished, sacred, and central to their identity. This rich tapestry of visual and textual storytelling naturally primes us to consider the other, more immediate senses, the sounds, sights, and feelings that made these places truly come alive. Imagine the experience of descending into the deep silence of an Indian stepwell, a silence so profound it feels like another world, and then hearing the faint, clear note of a single chant from a priest several levels above you. That sound wouldn't just fade away, it would be captured, amplified, and woven into a complex tapestry by the incredible acoustics of the space. The towering, parallel walls and the hard, reverberating stone surfaces acted like a natural sound studio, designed to carry the human voice and the gentle lap of water with crystalline clarity across vast distances. This wasn't an accident of architecture, it was a deliberate sensory design. The sound of sacred verses or the soft murmuring of prayers would bounce off the water's surface and the carved steps, creating an immersive auditory environment that enveloped the worshipper, making the act of prayer not just a mental or visual exercise, but a full-body experience of resonance and vibration. The space itself seemed to be singing along, a silent partner in the devotional act, using the physics of sound to deepen the feeling of connection to something larger than oneself. This mastery over the elements extended to the visual realm with breathtaking intentionality. The Inca engineers at sites like Tepon or Machu Picchu created fountains and channels that were feats of hydraulic precision, but their true genius was in their theatricality. They designed water to perform. A fountain might be positioned so that water cascaded down a precisely carved stone channel, not in a simple stream, but in a way that it broke into 1,000 individual droplets, catching the high-altitude sunlight and creating a permanent, shimmering rainbow or a perfect mimicry of a gentle rain shower. This was water mirroring the very natural phenomenon it represented: rainfall right before the worshipper's eyes. It was a daily, living miracle that visually demonstrated the god's power and generosity. In the subterranean gloom of a stepwell, the design played with light and shadow. The narrow shafts of sunlight that penetrated deep into the earth would hit the water at the bottom, causing it to shimmer and reflect dancing patterns of light onto the surrounding carved figures of gods and goddesses. For a moment, the stone deities seemed to come alive, animated by the liquid light of the sacred source they guarded. This visual drama was a form of storytelling without words, a dynamic display that reinforced the water's divine and life-giving properties every single day. But perhaps the most intimate and powerful sensory engagement was the simplest: touch. Across countless cultures, the physical interaction with sacred water was the crucial final step in the ritual, the moment the abstract became tangible. In the temple tanks of India, known as khans, worshippers wouldn't just look at the water, they would physically descend the steps and immerse their hands or their entire bodies in it. The feel of the cool water on the skin, especially in the blistering heat, was an immediate and visceral purification. It was a sensory reset, a washing away of the dust of the world and the metaphorical grime of sin or worry. In Japanese Shinto traditions, the ritual of tamizu before entering a shrine involves using a long-handled ladle to wash one's hands and mouth. The act is slow and deliberate. The feel of the wooden ladle handle, the sound of the water trickling, the cold splash on the hands forcing a moment of mindful presence and physical preparation to stand before the divine. This tactile connection made the spiritual journey inescapably physical. You didn't just think about purity, you felt it. You didn't just believe the water was sacred, you experienced its cleansing, cooling power directly on your body, grounding the entire spiritual experience in the undeniable reality of the physical senses. This multisensory curation reveals the deepest layer of intentionality in these ancient designs. They understood that true belief, true connection, is not built through intellect alone. It is forged through the body, by engaging sight, sound, and touch simultaneously. These sacred spaces created a form of total immersion that could quiet the chattering mind and speak directly to the spirit. The echoing chant in a stepwell, the glittering rainbow in an Inca fountain, the shock of cool water from a temple tank, these were not minor features, they were the essential tools of the experience. They fostered a holistic engagement that made the worshipper an active participant in a living, sensory dialogue with the element of water, an engagement that our modern, often sterile and visual-only environments have largely forgotten. This deep, embodied understanding of how to design for the human spirit, using nature's own elements as the medium, stands as one of the most sophisticated and poignant lessons these forgotten civilizations have left for us. While the grand structures and city-wide systems were often managed by male priests and engineers, the daily, intimate lifeblood of sacred water, its collection, its communal use, and its most personal rituals frequently flowed through the hands of women. In countless ancient societies, the relationship between women and water was a deeply ingrained social and spiritual dynamic, one that carved out unique spaces of authority, community, and power within the broader patriarchal frameworks of their time. This was not a minor footnote. It was a central pillar of how these sacred hydraulic systems functioned on a day-to-day basis, embedding the divine into the domestic and transforming the chore of water collection into an act of devotion and a source of female solidarity. Consider the vibrant, bustling world of an Indian stepwell during its heyday. While kings and wealthy merchants might have commissioned these magnificent structures, their true heart beat on the steps below, where women were the primary protagonists. The task of fetching water was traditionally and almost universally women's work, but the stepwell transformed this daily burden into a social and spiritual respite. It was a rare, sanctioned space where women could gather outside the home, free from the direct scrutiny of male family members. As they descended the steps, their water pots balanced on their heads, they would meet friends, exchange news, share laughter and grievances, and form the essential gossip networks that bound the community together. This was more than just a water source. It was a subterranean social club and a sanctuary. The cool, shaded galleries provided a refuge from the searing heat and the rigid social conventions of the world above. Here, in the company of other women, they could pray openly at the shrines to goddesses like Parvati or local fertility deities, seeking blessings for children, for healthy families, or for good marriages. The stepwell was a place where their spiritual needs, so often sidelined in grand temple ceremonies led by male Brahmins, could take center stage. They were not just water bearers, they were the primary congregants and caretakers of these aquatic temples, their daily presence a continuous act of worship that kept the spirit of the place alive. This pattern of female-led water worship echoed across the ancient world. In ancient Greece, the spiritual connection was even more formalized. Springs and fountains were believed to be the sacred dwellings of nymphs, female nature spirits who controlled the flow and purity of the water. The rituals to honor these powerful entities were not led by men but by women. They would be the ones to approach the spring with offerings of flowers, honey, or small cakes, to decorate the area with garlands, and to sing hymns and prayers to ensure the nymph's continued favor and the water's uninterrupted flow. These were not casual gestures. They were essential civic and religious duties performed by women to safeguard the community's most vital resource. Similarly, in ancient Rome, the Vestal Virgins, the most powerful priestesses in the state religion, were entrusted with the task of drawing water from a sacred spring for use in their rituals. The purity of the water was synonymous with their own vowed chastity, and the act of fetching it was a central, solemn duty that underpinned the spiritual security of the entire Roman state. These roles granted women a form of specialized knowledge and quiet authority that was crucial to the community's survival. The women who frequented the stepwells or local springs became intimate experts on water quality. They could tell by the taste, the smell, or the look of the water if something was amiss, serving as an early warning system for contamination or a falling water table. They were the keepers of oral traditions, passing down songs, prayers, and stories associated with the water sources to their daughters. This was a tangible, respected form of power derived from their indispensable role as hydrologists, ritualists, and community stewards. However, this delicate ecosystem of female authority was profoundly disrupted by the forces of colonialism and top-down modernization. British officials in India, with their Victorian sensibilities, often viewed the communal, female-centric world of the Stepwell with suspicion, seeing it as unhygienic and morally suspect. The promotion of piped water systems and private household taps, while offering convenience, had an unintended social consequence. It gradually dismantled these vital public spaces for women. The need to gather at the communal well faded, and with it the daily ritual of social bonding, shared spiritual practice, and the informal network of support that these trips provided. The water came to the home, but the community scattered. The specialized knowledge that came from daily contact with the source became obsolete, and a centuries-old structure of female space and authority quietly eroded, replaced by a more isolated, utilitarian relationship with water. This shift illustrates with painful clarity that technological progress is never neutral. It always carries a social cost, and in this case, it was a cost disproportionately paid by the women who lost a domain that was uniquely theirs. This deep, spiritual relationship with water did far more than just shape individual buildings or rituals. It fundamentally sculpted the very bedrock of society itself, weaving itself into the legal codes, economic systems, and collective identities of entire civilizations. When water is seen as sacred, the rules for managing it cease to be mere regulations and become articles of faith, creating a powerful ethical framework that promoted fairness, shared responsibility, and a profound sense of communal pride. This wasn't a vague idealism. It was a practical, powerful force that organized labor, redistributed wealth, and gave people a shared purpose that transcended social class. The magnificent water structures we admire today were not built by slave labor under the whip of a tyrant. They were more often the product of a collective sacred duty, a societal agreement that caring for the water source was tantamount to caring for the soul of the community. This is perfectly illustrated by the Hindu concept of dana, or selfless charity. In ancient India, the construction of a massive stepwell was an astronomically expensive undertaking, far beyond the means of any single village. Rather than being a tax burden imposed by a king, it was most commonly funded through dana. A wealthy merchant, a successful farmer, or even a queen seeking spiritual merit would donate the vast sums required to build the well as a pious act, a way of earning good karma and earning the respect of the community. The stepwell itself would often bear an inscription recording this donation, not as a boast but as a permanent testament to that act of generosity. This system transformed public works from a government expense into a spiritual opportunity, channeling private wealth directly into public good. The resulting structure belonged to everyone, but its existence was a permanent reminder of a social contract where prosperity came with a responsibility to give back, creating a powerful link between economic success and communal benefit. A different but equally effective model for organizing this sacred labor was practiced by the Inca Empire with their mitas system. This was a form of public service, a mandatory labor tax that every household owed to the state. But crucially, it was not seen as an oppressive burden, because the Inca state was fundamentally a theocracy, with the emperor believed to be a direct descendant of the sun god Inti. Work for the state was work for the gods. When a community was called upon to contribute labor to a massive hydraulic project, perhaps building a new aqueduct to feed the terraced farms of the Andes, or maintaining the canals that fed the sacred city of Cusco, they answered the call as a religious duty. This collective effort, where everyone from noble to commoner contributed their labor, created an incredible sense of shared purpose and civic pride. The resulting infrastructure was not owned by a distant ruler. It was built by the hands of the people for the people under the auspices of the divine. This system efficiently marshaled the manpower needed for enormous projects while reinforcing the social bonds that held the empire together. all under the sacred imperative of managing water wisely. Beyond funding and labor, these structures became the ultimate civic symbols, their grandeur a direct reflection of the community's piety and cohesion. A city with a magnificent nymphaeum, a flawless aqueduct, or an intricately carved stepwell was making a powerful statement. It said, "We are a people who honor our gods, we work together, and we have mastered our environment through devotion and skill." This fostered an immense sense of identity and pride that cut across social classes. The wealthy patrician drinking from a Roman fountain and the poorest plebeian filling their jar from the same source were partaking in the same divine gift, their differences momentarily erased by their shared dependence on and reverence for the water that flowed through their city. These structures were the great equalizers, their benefits available to all, creating a tangible, daily reminder of a common humanity underpinned by a shared sacred source. This holistic approach created a self-reinforcing cycle of stewardship and equity. The spiritual belief mandated fair distribution. It would be a profound sin to hoard or pollute a divine gift. This often led to the development of remarkably sophisticated and just water laws. In the Moorish acequia systems of Spain, and later the American Southwest, a duly elected mayordomo would oversee the water distribution according to a strict, publicly known schedule, ensuring every farmer got their fair share based on need and precedent, not wealth or power. The system was managed locally by the users themselves, who understood that cooperation was essential for everyone's survival. This wasn't just pragmatism. It was a direct application of a worldview that saw water as a sacred trust to be managed equitably for the good of the whole community, not a private commodity to be fought over. These historical models present a stark and instructive contrast to our modern world, where water is often a source of conflict, a privatized commodity, and an afterthought in urban design. They offer us a powerful lesson that by reintegrating a sense of the sacred into our relationship with water, we might rediscover the ethical frameworks that promote not just sustainability, but also justice, community, and a shared identity built around caring for the most precious element we all depend on. So as we draw our journey to a close, standing amidst the echoes of these ancient wonders, a powerful and urgent truth comes into focus. The sacred hydraulics of forgotten civilizations were never just about survival. They were a profound dialogue with the very essence of life itself. These cultures understood something we have largely forgotten, that water is not a mere resource to be dominated and extracted, but a sacred covenant, a living force that demands our reverence, our gratitude, and our most ingenious cooperation. They built stepwells that were subterranean temples, aqueducts that were tributes to nymphs, and kanats that were gifts from a goddess, weaving together spirituality, ecology, and community into a single, inseparable tapestry. Their architecture was a prayer in stone, a physical manifestation of a world-view where every drop of water was holy, and every act of drawing it was an act of devotion. This holistic, integrated approach stands in stark contrast to our modern paradigm, which has too often reduced water to an anonymous chemical compound in a pipe, a utility bill, a calculated variable in an industrial process. This fragmentation, separating the practical from the spiritual, the ecological from the economic, lies at the heart of our current water crises. We see the consequences all around us, in the depleted aquifers, the polluted rivers, and the parched landscapes that are becoming more common by the day. Our relationship with water has become transactional, and in the process, we have broken the sacred contract that these ancient societies so diligently upheld. They teach us that sustainability is not a technological problem to be solved with bigger pumps or deeper wells. It is a spiritual and ethical crisis that requires a fundamental shift in perception. To resacralize water is not to abandon science, but to elevate it, to guide our brilliant engineering with the wisdom of reverence, ensuring our solutions are not just efficient, but also equitable, beautiful, and enduring. The good news is that the path forward is being rediscovered, and you can be a part of it. This re-enchantment begins with a simple shift in perspective, a conscious choice to see the water that flows from your tap not as a given, but as a miracle. It continues with action. If you ever have the chance, seek out these places of power. Walk the steps of a restored stepwell in India and feel the cool air rise to meet you. Visit the floating gardens of Xochimilco and glide through canals that still whisper Aztec prayers. Witness the enduring flow of a Persian Kanat and marvel at the ancient genius of its design. Your presence and support for these preservation efforts, whether through visiting, donating, or simply spreading the word, helps to keep this wisdom alive. But the journey doesn't require a passport. You can incorporate this reverence into your own daily life. Create a small ritual around water, perhaps pausing to give thanks before you drink, installing a rain barrel to reconnect with the cycle of rainfall, or simply taking a moment to truly listen to the sound of a stream in a local park. These small acts are a way to rebuild that severed connection, to remember that we are part of a watery world, not separate from it. Centuries ago, the visionary Leonardo da Vinci, who spent his life studying the flow of rivers and the movement of waves, penned a truth that resonates more powerfully today than ever before. Water is the driving force of all nature. He saw what the ancient builders of stepwells and kanats knew in their bones, that water is the primal element, the source of all creativity, life, and renewal. It is the force that carved the Grand Canyons and the force that courses through our own veins. The question now is, how will we choose to relate to this force? Will we continue on a path of domination and disconnection, or will we find the courage to learn from the past and build a future where our architecture, our cities, and our hearts once again honor water as sacred? We would love to hear your thoughts. How do you think we can revive these wisdom traditions in our modern world? Share your ideas in the comments below, and let's continue this vital conversation together. Thank you.